Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Payroll Data and GDPR, where we will discuss what you need to know about consent, emailing payslips and your legal obligation. So in this webinar we will specifically look at the impact of GDPR on your payroll processing and highlight the biggest areas of concern. We will walk you through some important steps to achieve your GDPR compliance and we'll try to make it not as boring as possible. As we already completed a sound check with the people who logged on early, so I'm just going to get straight into the webinar. To introduce ourselves before we get started, there's three of us speaking today. So firstly, my name is Karen Bennett. I'm the marketing manager here at Thesaurus Software. I'm also going to be joined by my colleague Rachel Hines, who works alongside me in the marketing department, and then we have Jenny Hussey, who I suppose did a lot of work for Thesaurus Software getting ready for our GDPR compliance. So she feels your pain, I suppose. So here is the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to have a look at what GDPR means for your payroll processing, your payslips, and your GDPR compliance, breaching GDPR, and finally how we have prepared and how we can help with GDPR compliance. We're also going to have a look at our two, I suppose, add-on or sister products, BrightPay Connect and Bright Contracts today, just to show you how both of those products can help you with your GDPR compliance. So at the end of today's webinar, we will have a Q&A session. So we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. There's a lot of people registered for today's webinar, so please bear with us as we get through those questions. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will send all attendees a link to the recording of today's webinar, along with the presentation slides that you can look at after the webinar. So it'll probably be tomorrow before we'll send that information on to you. A short survey will also appear after you close down the webinar, and it only takes 1 minute just to complete it. So if you can complete it, it'll help us improve our webinars going forward.
Good morning, everybody. So we'll take a quick look at the understanding of GDPR and a quick introduction to it. So personal data and the security of it is now a fundamental right of the data subject since the introduction of the General Data Protection Regulation on May 25th of this year. And the obligations of what the new GDPR rules impose on employers, whom we're going to be looking at today, that collect and process personal data on their employees makes this new legislation one of the most significant overhauls for employment law in this country and across Europe in generations. As we know today, internet usage and social media is part and parcel of daily life. So the legislation prior to May 25th was certainly not sufficient by any manner, as it dated back as far as 1988, which I'm very sorry to say is actually 30 years ago now. Some people might think it's not that long ago, but given the advances in technology in those 30 years, it is a massive, massive change. Now, a common misconception that we come across is that it's not going to apply to me, okay? And generally, this is not the case. All companies, regardless of size, whether they be a sole trader, charitable organisation, even down to the secretary in the local school, GDPR is going to affect all areas where personal data is being collected, stored or processed. So more than likely, it is going to affect you in some manner. Article 30 states that the implementation of appropriate technical and organisational measures need to be put in place in order to ensure the security of personal data. And that's kind of what we're looking at today. So the overarching principle really of the GDPR is that of accountability. Controllers and processors need to be able to demonstrate compliance with these new regulations. So taking a quick look then, there are 6 principles of data protection under the GDPR. And basically these principles is that personal data should be processed lawfully, fairly and in a transparent manner. And you'll hear this, kind of point a few times as we go throughout the actual webinar itself. Personal data should be collected only for specific, explicit and legitimate purposes and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. It has to be adequate, relevant and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which it is processed. It has to be accurate. It has to be kept up to date, and where necessary, every reasonable step must be taken to ensure that personal data that is incorrect or inaccurate is erased or rectified without delay. It has to be kept in a form which permits identification of data subjects for no longer than what is required, and it has to be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of personal data. So this includes protection against unauthorized, unlawful processing, accidental loss, destruction, damage, again, using these new appropriate technical and organizational measures. One of the most significant developments with the GDPR for employers is that the emphasis is on transparency and accountability. So employers need to be able to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR, or they are going to risk enforcement action from the Data Protection Commissioner. There's also fines, which Karen's going to talk about later on, and there's compensation claims where employees can actually make claims directly against the employers too. So GDPR introduces new and enhanced rights for employees. And these include the right to be informed, and this emphasizes the need for transparency and how you use the personal data. You have to be very clear with the data subject, i.e. your employee, about how and why their data is being collected. The right of access. So this is where the data subject can access or can request access to what data you hold on them. Now there's a few points on this. The time frame for your response back to the access request was originally 40 days, has been reduced down to 1 month now. And depending on what format you received the request in, you need to provide it back in that same format. So if you received the request in an email, you need to send it back that way. If you receive it via registered post, you need to send it back that way. Previously, there had been fees that you could charge the individual who was looking for the request. They've been removed. And you know, something to kind of take note of as well is that you can refuse the request if you find that it's manifestly unfounded or excessive. You know, so if it's inappropriate or not, you know, going to gain anything for either party, well then you can actually refuse it. The next one then is the right to rectification. So individuals are entitled to have personal data rectified if it's inaccurate or incomplete. There's an enhanced right there to erasure, or also known as the right to be forgotten. So the broad principle being that an individual has the right to request deletion or removal of personal data where there's no compelling reason to retain that information. Now again, there are situations there where you could refuse to delete the data if you have to comply with a legal obligation, i.e. keeping your tax records, things like that. The next one then is your right to restrict processing. But again, you still have to have the ability to retain that information if you're required to do so for statutory purposes. The right to data portability. This is more commonly done in the likes of banking, whereby you can kind of copy or transfer personal data from one IT environment to another. The right to object to the processing of their data. So for example, for direct marketing purposes, you have to inform individuals of their right to object at the first point of contact and also in your privacy notice. And then finally, rights in relation to automated decision making. Automated decision making relates to any form of automated processing that's intended to evaluate certain personal aspects of an individual. So this could include your health, work performance, economic situations, i.e. in the banking institutes. And where there is automated decision making, individuals have the right to obtain human intervention or express their own point of view. So for example, you might have in the banking institution a facility where you type in your earnings and it will come back automatically to say whether or not you'd be eligible to get a mortgage. That would be deemed as automated decision making. You have the right to actually request a human intervention or give more information that might change the point of view on what's actually come back. So I'll pass you back over to Karen now.
Okay, so how will GDPR impact on your payroll processing? So businesses process large amounts of personal data, not least in relation to their customers and their own employees. All businesses are required to make sure their data will be processed securely and responsibly under GDPR. Given recent cyber attacks, an updated security process is definitely required to protect the personal data that we all manage. I suppose GDPR is not a new concept. It is simply a data protection process that is being upgraded to protect all individuals. GDPR will see an overhaul of the way we currently process, manage and store individuals' personal data. Employers must provide employees with a privacy notice setting out certain details about how their information is managed. Employees will have greater rights to be informed about how long their information will be stored and how it will be used. As Jenny said, employees can also request access to the personal information that is held on them, where they can request to have it rectified, and in some cases where there is no compelling reason to retain the data, they can request for it to be deleted. Employees now have the right to increased transparency to ensure their data is being managed correctly under the GDPR legislation. Businesses should fully understand the concept of GDPR and the impact it will have on both their business and their employees.
So just as Karen's mentioned there in relation to the transparency, the GDPR stipulates that anywhere personal data is being collected, whether it be directly or indirectly, privacy notices should be in place. And these policies really are critical to complying with those transparency obligations in the GDPR regulations. So on our sister company, Bright Contracts, it is separate to the payroll itself. We've taken that headache away from you with the introduction of a new employee privacy policy on the system. The policy will cover those required elements and ensure demonstrable compliance in regard to the employer's obligations that Karen's just spoken of. So we will take a brief look at the Bright Contracts software and that employee privacy policy a little later on.
So understanding GDPR. There are three basic sets of rules relating to individuals' payroll and personal data. So first up, we have data management. Payroll and personal data must be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. Your employee data must be collected for the legitimate purpose of completing the payroll. All of your employees' payroll data must be kept up to date and only be used for processing the payroll. You must ensure that payroll clients and employee payroll data is protected and secured against loss, damage, unlawful access, and cyber attacks. Next up we have is data processing. Where a business processes their payroll in-house, they are both the data controllers and the data processors. Where a business outsources their payroll to an accountant or a payroll bureau, then the bureau is the data processor and the employer is the data controller. The payroll data processor can lawfully process data on behalf of a client as long as there is a written contract in place between the payroll bureau and the client. This contract represents a legal obligation for the payroll processor, which would be the accountant or the payroll bureau, to have access to the data in order to complete the payroll. Data processors must only process data as per the written instruction of their client. Hence, it is of the utmost importance that a comprehensive contract is in place. Additionally, the GDPR legislation sets out further requirements regarding what must be included in the contract between a payroll processor and their client. These include, but are not limited to, confirmation of security, confidentiality, and details of any sub-processor that is used. And lastly, we have transferring data internationally. Under GDPR, it is prohibited to send your employees data outside of the European Economic Area unless that country provides an adequate level of protection for the rights of individuals' personal data. Transferring your employees' data outside of the EU does require extra caution and must meet the specific criteria as set out in the GDPR regulations. So GDPR preparation. At this stage, you should have reviewed and updated your current data protection policies, which should be clearly communicated to all of your employees. So check with your current software providers, data processors, and contractors to see what they are doing to comply with the GDPR legislation. You will likely need to update or amend certain contracts you have in place with third-party contractors or vendors. The GDPR makes every business responsible for any third parties you may use who processes the personal data on your behalf. You will need to manage and store the client's information in a more secure environment. It will also be important to keep a record of how you are storing this information and for what purpose should you ever be audited or reported. If you are not prepared for GDPR, you should take immediate steps to protect the data that you manage. The GDPR legislation makes every business responsible for these third parties, i.e. your accountant or payroll bureau, who processes the personal data on their behalf. Payroll processors also need to manage and store their clients' information in a very secure environment. And in that case as well, it'll also be important to keep a record of how you are storing this information and for what purpose should you ever be audited or reported.
Now, looking at that in your preparation guide, we've created a 7-step guide that we feel businesses should consider following to help in their preparation for the GDPR, which will cover what Karen's just mentioned there. We've done previous GDPR webinars which look into these kind of steps in more detail, but just to give you a very brief summary of them. The first thing, and probably one of the most important things, is to complete an inventory of all the data that you hold and process currently. This will enable you to see if you've got any gaps in your current processes and allow you to kind of see what needs to be done in order to demonstrate that compliance that we're talking about. As Karen's mentioned there, you need to review your existing policies, your privacy policies, and update them where necessary, and especially employee privacy policies and your own online privacy policy that you may hold as well. You need to review your contracts, as Karen has said, that you have in place with clients and any third-party providers. We do have a data processor agreement available on your support documentation. I think Rachel's going to talk about that a little later on. And you need to look at how you're capturing your consent. If you do use consent, i.e. marketing, you need to see whether or not it's compatible with the new regulations. And you have to make sure that the mailing lists you are using only have active subscribers. And I'm sure, like myself, you would have all seen the load of emails in and around the 25th of May where your current subscription list providers were looking for you to continue by requesting your consent or telling you that they've updated their privacy policy and please subscribe again. So that was a huge bulge in my inbox, certainly for those few weeks. You need to then develop a plan as to how you're going to maintain your GDPR compliance. It's going to be an ongoing process that you need to monitor constantly and update as well. It's not going to be just a one-off measure. You need to then review the security measures you have in place, look at introducing more stringent security like encryptions or anonymizations if you need to, or even a simple step like putting in place a clean desk policy or having, a shredding bin beside the printer. Simple things like that make it look like you're trying to account for it. Then privacy impact assessments. So if you do process any kind of special categories of data, whether it be ethnic origin, trade union membership, or process, kind of high quantity processing, well, then you may need to look at having a data protection privacy impact assessment put in. Also, then we've got your privacy by design and privacy by default, and this is that you're going to consider the security of the data throughout the whole organization, right from the actual company setup. That you're taking into consideration that the security of personal data is an important part of the process and it's not a second thought. And then finally, as a source of advice to your clients, you obviously give it to them on many subjects, so it would certainly be recommended that you play some form of role in informing them and advising them of the GDPR and the new regulations that will apply to those also.
Okay, so GDPR compliance. So as previously mentioned, the GDPR stipulates that a contract must exist between a data controller, that being a business, and a data processor, that being an accountant or payroll bureau. So the actual onus is on the data controllers to put these contracts in place. So I said earlier on, if you process your payroll in-house, you are the data controller and you're also the data processor, and no contract is required. If the payroll is outsourced to an accountant, then the accountant is the data processor. And if they're ever audited, they will need to provide certain information to prove their GDPR compliance, such as an agreed contract. So there does need to be a written contract or letter of engagement in place that covers GDPR. This contract would outline that employees' personal data will be provided to the Bureau to process the payroll for the business. I suppose this doesn't mean that a payroll client can simply hand over their employees' personal information to an accountant and then cast a blind eye. Your payroll client or the business must also ensure that you are compliant with the GDPR legislation. Next, we have fulfilling the contract. To fulfill the contract, you will need to hold certain business information, such as their employer reference number and their bank account details, which are all legitimately viable under GDPR. You need to hold this information in order to fulfill the agreed contract of processing the client's payroll. And lastly, we have the legitimate reason. Every business needs to have a legitimate reason as to why they hold an individual's personal information. Payroll bureaus are deemed as processors as they process their clients' and their employees' personal data. Payroll bureaus hold certain client information to complete the payroll, such as your PPS number, your tax codes, dates of births, employee salaries, and employer details as well. This is all classified as a valid and legitimate reason to hold this kind of personal payroll information. So proof of compliance. Businesses should keep a record of how they are securely protecting the data that they process and manage. Where a business does outsource their payroll to a data processor, they should ensure that their employees' data is securely maintained and adequately protected by the third party under the rules of the GDPR legislation. Should your business ever be subject to an audit or a GDPR breach, you will need to show this evidence that demonstrates you have taken the appropriate action to protect the personal data held by your organisation and any third-party organisations. Okay, so businesses should password protect computers or devices that hold personal payroll data. For example, the PC that they access the payroll software on. The payroll software application itself should also be password protected should anyone else ever access your computer. It is advisable to password protect your employees' payslips that you may email to employees each pay period. And your payroll software supplier should provide a password protection feature for both the payslips and the payroll software itself. So you should be able to provide detailed information on how long the personal information will be stored for. The GDPR does not specify any particular retention periods for personal data. It does state that personal data may only be kept for no longer than is necessary for the purpose for which it was processed. So I suppose when considering your retention periods, businesses should be guided by the statutory retention periods, individual business needs, and data protection principles. And according to guidelines, you should keep your payroll records and payslips for up to 6 years from the end of the tax year they relate to. So payslips and GDPR compliance. Businesses must provide their employees with information on what happens to their data. For example, sharing employees' personal data with the payroll bureau or accountant who processes the payroll. Employee personal data can be stored and managed by a third party for the sole benefit of correctly paying the wages, paying the correct tax, and providing a payslip. All of this legitimately falls under the remit of the GDPR legislation. By law, employers must provide employees with a payslip, which does include personal information, such as proof of earnings, tax paid, and any pension contributions. So it is advisable that businesses take steps to protect and securely send this payslip information. So many employers and accountants have expressed concern and confusion in relation to getting consent from employees to use their data in order to correctly pay them and securely send them a payslip. So employers do not need to seek consent from individual employees, as you are legally obliged to pay your staff. If the payroll is outsourced to a data processor, the employer will need to inform their employees that they are sharing their personal information with a third party. An employer does not need to seek consent to outsource the payroll. It is also an employer's responsibility to ensure that their data processor is taking action to protect their employees' payroll information under GDPR. An employee cannot withdraw their consent for their personal data to be used as part of the payroll processing. And it should be noted that data processors should only keep the personal data that is strictly required for the purpose of processing the payroll. This is referred to as data minimization or privacy by default. Okay, so posting your payslips. There's nothing in the GDPR legislation that states it is no longer permissible to post payslips. If you do post payslips, you will need to ensure that all appropriate security measures are in place to protect the payslip. So this may include using security payslip envelopes, marking the envelope as private and confidential, and ensuring that it is addressed to the individual employee. And in some cases, you may decide to use registered post. Likewise, there is nothing in the GDPR legislation that states it is no longer permissible to email payslips. But again, you should take steps to securely protect each employee's payslip. When emailing payslips, we recommend password protecting all payslips with a password that is uniquely chosen by the employee. The payslip should also be sent directly to the chosen employee's email address. Where a generic and identical password is used for all employees, this could be considered a breach of GDPR. This action could be seen as not taking sufficient steps to offer the most secure environment to protect employees' personal pay information. Furthermore, your payroll provider should also provide secure encryption on all payslips and automatically delete payslips that are sent from their server. So check with your current provider to be certain they are offering this level of protection. And if not, you really should look to another payroll provider who does. Under GDPR, for maximum security, it is recommended but not mandatory to offer a secure self-service portal to securely send and store payslips and other sensitive payroll documents. I suppose, so what is your recommended self-service option? So the GDPR legislation includes a best practice recommendation for businesses to provide individuals with a secure self-service platform offering remote access to information held on them. On a self-service system, employees can remotely access payroll information, including payslips, contact details, and employee documents, such as employment contracts and handbooks. Employees can also request leave and view their annual leave entitlements, including leave taken and leave remaining, which are also considered personal data. The employee self-service portal should also be password protected for every employee. Again, identical or generic passwords must not be used for all employees. Each employee's password should be unique, chosen by the employee, and confidential, offering maximum protection. Accessing payslips and personal contact details through a remote access secure system will really provide you with flexibility and full transparency for employees to retrieve and update their information at any time. A self-service portal also offers significant benefits for data controllers and data processors to comply with the GDPR legislation. Remote access will provide you and employees with direct access to payroll information anywhere, anytime. You can basically log in 24/7 to view your employee's payslip, leave request, HR documents, amounts due to revenue, and other sensitive payroll reports. Employers also benefit as they can now automate the distribution of payslips. A self-service portal that is directly integrated with the payroll software will allow for payslips to be available as soon as the employer has stipulated that they need to be available, i.e., at the end of the month, or maybe the 28th of every month, for example. This offers additional security against cyber attacks and eliminates email hacks that could occur when sending and receiving payslips or payroll reports by email. Additionally, a self-service option does allow businesses to keep their data updated and accurate, as employees can also edit their contact information on a self-service portal.
Okay, so GDPR places increased responsibilities on all parties that process personal data. Whenever a data controller uses a data processor, there needs to be a written contract in place. This next section is primarily aimed at payroll bureaus who are acting as a third party, processing the payroll for their clients. In this situation, the client is considered the data controller and the payroll bureau is considered the data processor. The contract is important so that both parties understand their responsibilities and liabilities. Controllers are liable for their compliance with the GDPR and must only appoint processors who can provide sufficient guarantees that the requirements of the GDPR will be met and the rights of the data subjects protected. Data processors will, however, have some direct responsibilities under the GDPR and may be subject to fines or other sanctions if they don't comply. Going forward, all contracts will need to comply with the new GDPR requirements, even if the contract existed before the introduction of GDPR. Although the onus is on the data controllers to ensure that contracts are in place with third parties, if you are a payroll bureau, our advice is that when it comes to GDPR, you should take aim to take an active role in educating your clients about the new regulations. It would be well advised to approach clients and start putting the appropriate contract in place if not already done so. To comply with the new requirements under GDPR, payroll bureaus have two options. They could draft new terms of service, EULAs, or engagement letters for each of their clients to include the new GDPR requirements. Or, where you have an existing contract in place, you could issue an addendum to this contract covering the new GDPR requirements. This is commonly known as a data processor agreement. To assist our customers, we have created a template data processor agreement which can be used as an addendum to any existing contracts. This can be downloaded in the handout section at the right of your screen on your control panel, or it will also be included in the webinar follow-up email. Under previous data protection laws, contracts between a controller and a processor were required to be in writing, to only process data on the instruction of the data controller, and to take appropriate measures to keep all personal data secure. With the GDPR, the contract requirements are now wider, and the GDPR sets out what needs to be included in the contract between the controller and the processor. All contracts must include the subject matter and duration of the processing, the nature and purpose of the processing, the type of personal data and categories of data subject, and the obligations and rights of the controller. The following mandatory contractual terms should also be included. The processor must only act on the written instruction of the controller unless required by law to act without such instruction. They must ensure that people processing the data are subject to a duty of confidence. The processor must take appropriate measures to ensure the security of processing. The processor must only engage a sub-processor with the prior consent of the data controller and a written contract. They must assist the data controller in meeting its GDPR obligations in relation to the security of processing, the notification of personal data breaches, and data protection impact assessments. And finally, the processor must submit to audits and inspections, provide the controller with whatever information it needs, and tell the controller immediately if it is asked to do something infringing the GDPR or other data protection laws. The contract must also include end-of-contract provisions in order to ensure the continued security of the personal data. The processor must delete or return all personal data to the controller as requested at the end of the contract. And just to note as well, an exemption does apply where the data processor is required by law to retain the data.
Okay, so I suppose there's a lot of information there about your letter of engagement and your contract, etc. And we do have information on our website as a reference if you wanted to have a look at our GDPR FAQs. Okay, so breaching GDPR. There is a mandatory breach reporting requirement where employers must report certain types of breaches to the Data Protection Authority. So a personal breach occurs where a business's security systems have been compromised, leading to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of, or access to personal data. A business must determine the level of the breach's severity and the risk it could present to an individual's rights and freedoms. If it is considered a risk, then you must notify the local supervisory authority. Businesses must issue notifications of valid data breaches to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner within 72 hours of becoming aware of the breach. If there is no risk, then you do not need to report it. However, businesses who do not report a breach should keep a record and be able to justify their reasoning behind their decision not to report it and document those reasons. Failing to report a breach can result in an investigation and/or penalties. So make sure you have suitable procedures in place to notify the regulator where breaches have been reported and identified. Inform all staff of the correct procedure to follow should a breach occur. Check with your IT team or staff to ensure your computer systems allow for your employees to securely delete and manage personal data in line with the GDPR legislation. It is also worth noting that individuals also have the option to file a class action lawsuit if a business does not comply with the GDPR. The legislation applies to every business, large and small, and there really will be no exceptions for small businesses. So non-compliance and penalties. The DPC will take non-compliance very seriously with significant fines and penalties in place for businesses who breach the GDPR legislation. Fines will be incurred of €20 million or 4% of a business's turnover, whichever is the greater amount. The level of fine being imposed will depend on the type of breach that a business has committed. The fines are designed to punish any business that willfully ignores their GDPR legislation. However, these fines will be mitigated against if there is evidence that shows that a business has prepared and worked towards their GDPR compliance. Okay, so I'm now going to pass it back over to Rachel, and we're just going to have a look at BrightPay Connect to show you how it can help with your GDPR.
Okay, so as mentioned earlier, with the GDPR, it is recommended to provide remote access to a secure system, which would provide employees with direct access to their personal data. I'm going to take you through a look at BrightPay Connect, which is our self-service option. We also have Thesaurus Connect as well for those customers using Thesaurus Payroll Manager, but for the demo purposes, I'm going to look at BrightPay Connect. Thesaurus Connect and BrightPay Connect are tailored to help you and your clients overcome some of the key challenges GDPR presents when processing payroll. Essentially, Thesaurus Connect and BrightPay Connect are automated cloud backups, keeping employees' payroll data safe and secure. The payroll itself is still processed on your desktop application. However, the payroll information is stored online on a secure cloud server. Because the payroll information is stored online, it has allowed us to bring you even more benefits to help you with GDPR compliance. So here we have Brightpay payroll software, and up at the top corner of the screen you can access Brightpay Connect. So with the GDPR, it is important to keep a copy of payroll files safe in case of fire, theft, damaged computers, or even cyber attacks. Brightpay Connect will automatically back up your payroll data to the cloud, where a chronological history of all backups will be maintained, which can be downloaded or restored anytime. Since the payroll data is stored online with Brightpay Connect, you can invite employees to their own password-protected self-service portal. If you are a payroll bureau, you can also invite your clients to their own online employer dashboard. Employers and employees can log in 24/7 on any device, including PCs, Macs, tablets and smartphones, essentially anywhere that you have access to an internet browser. This fulfills the GDPR recommendation to provide remote access to a secure system where employees would have direct access to their personal data. Here on the screen we have the employer dashboard, and this is what both Brightpay Connect and Thesaurus Connect online portals look like for businesses processing their own payroll in-house, and it's also what it looks like for payroll bureaus and their clients. In the Employees tab, employers can access payslips and payroll documents for each of their employees. Payslips will automatically be available to employers on Brightpay Connect as soon as the payroll has been finalised. For employees, the payslips will be available as set up by the user when connecting to Brightpay Connect. So you may decide one day before payday or on the payday, for example. The next tab is Reports, and here employers can log in anytime and run their own payroll reports. Again, as soon as the payroll is finalised, any report that is saved in the payroll software will automatically be available on Brightpay Connect to both employers and payroll clients. For payroll bureaus, this eliminates the need to email reports to clients each pay period. Next up we have the calendar, which is a company-wide employee calendar. Employers can view past and scheduled leave for all employees, including annual leave, unpaid leave, sick leave and absence leave. Within the Revenue tab, employers can view amounts due to revenue and can click into each individual month to view a full breakdown of the P30. Next is Documents, and here employers can upload sensitive HR documents and confidential employee information. So employers can upload documents that apply to all employees, such as a company handbook, documents that are unique to individual employees, for example, a contract of employment, or even documents that are relevant to a particular department. So let's say training documents, for example. It also goes one step further, and rather than just a document upload, you may decide to add a hyperlink or notes instead, allowing the employer to use it as a company notice board with email notifications to employees. The final tab is Settings, and here employers can add their company logo, which employees will see on the login screen. There are other self-service settings available here also. So for example, the employer may decide to turn off the ability for employees to request annual leave through the portal. So far, everything we have seen is visible to employers, payroll bureaus and payroll clients. However, bureaus can go one step further, where they have an additional layer of information available. Here, the bureau has an overview of multiple employers, where they can view each of their clients within the one account. They also have the ability to set up users, so they may decide to add an administrator who has high-level access to all information, or a standard user, which would be how you add your clients who would have access to one employer file, or even co-workers who might have access to multiple but not all employer files. For a standard user, you can set up user restrictions. Going back to GDPR and what Karen and Jenny said earlier, privacy by default means that you should only have access to information required to complete your specific task. So here we may have a HR manager who should have access to the employee calendar and approve leave requests. On the other hand, there may be a payroll administrator that should not have access to employee documents or employees marked as confidential. The next tab here is settings, and here accountants can add their own logo. So for the client, it looks like they are logging into a portal unique to your practice. Moving on now to the third and final user, the individual employee. And as mentioned earlier, they can log in remotely to a self-service portal as recommended under the GDPR. Employees can log into the self-service portal on any internet browser, or there is also a smartphone app where employees can log in and get notifications directly to their device. Similar to the employer dashboard, employees will have an overview screen with notifications of payslips and various documents, an overview of personal information and upcoming calendar events. The employee can click into the documents to view a full overview of all current and other payroll documents, such as P60s and P45s. The employee can access each individual payslip and download them if needed. So for example, if they're applying for a loan. Going back into the Documents tab again, employees can click into HR Documents and Resources, and here employees can view HR documents that have been uploaded by their employer, such as their contract of employment. Employees also have the ability to update their basic personal details, such as their phone number and postal address. The right to rectification of personal data held is an employee right under the GDPR. This feature also helps with the requirement to have up-to-date and accurate information. The final tab available to employees is Calendar, and here employees can access an overview of all past and scheduled leave. Here they can also request annual leave instantly. Simply choose the date, the type of leave, whether it's a full day or a half day, and click Submit. The employer or HR manager who is selected to approve the annual leave will get an automated email to say that the employee has requested leave. And then switching back to the employer dashboard again, they can see a notification for the leave request where they can approve or reject the leave. Once approved, the leave will appear in the employer and employee calendars. So just to summarise the key GDPR points covered by Thesaurus Connect and by Connect then, Connect allows you to keep employee payroll data safe and secure. It enables you to offer self-service remote access to employees as recommended by the GDPR. For bureaus, it introduces a secure portal for client communications, eliminating the need to send documents with sensitive personal information by email. Connect gives the ability to employees to update their own personal information, making sure details are relevant and up to date. Users can be set up so that they only have access to the information needed to complete their duties, ensuring privacy by default. Connect acts as an all-in-one central location to store all things employee-related, including payroll, HR, and other employment-related documents. Essentially, by introducing Thesaurus Connect or by Connect in your business, you will be taking steps to be GDPR compliant.
Thanks, Rachel. So just very quickly, we'll take a look at how Bright Contracts can help you with your GDPR compliance. So as we said already, Bright Contracts is a sister company to BrightPay and Thesaurus. It's a software that allows the user to create and manage legally compliant employment contracts and customizable staff handbooks with all the required and recommended policies from an employment law perspective. And having your employee contracts and other personal data like the privacy policies in the program, which has built-in encryption and security measures, means the employer is demonstrating compliance with those GDPR regulations around the security of that data. One of the main principles of the GDPR is that the data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. These three elements do overlap, and they need to be satisfied in order to demonstrate compliance. So employers, as both data controllers and processors, must be able to show how they comply with the new data protection principles and be clear and open with their employees about the processing of data and their rights. So we've recently upgraded the Bright Contract software to include a new employee privacy policy feature. So now employers can facilitate that main GDPR principle of lawful, fair and transparent processing of the employee data. It's very simple and easy to use. The employer needs to select 2 compulsory sections relating to whether any automated decision making occurs, and maybe a system to automatically select possible job applicants, and whether or not any of the data that you hold is transferred outside of the EU for specific or storage purposes. We actually use the Microsoft Azure servers here, which are based in Europe, so it's covered in regard to that. So once you've got the compulsory sections and any specific sections selected, the system will generate a compliant employee privacy policy indicating what data is processed, how it was collected, with whom it's shared, like any third parties, your accountant or payroll bureau maybe, or pension providers, how long it's kept for, the rights of the individual that we spoke of earlier on, and who the data controller is. So the employee privacy policy is critical to complying with the transparency obligations within the GDPR. So it's vital that they have that correct and appropriate information included and that they're presented in a clear and understandable format. So Bright Contracts does all that for you, and literally with a click of a couple of clicks of your mouse, the system will generate that employee privacy policy for you, again enabling the employer to tick off another box regarding GDPR compliance. You can find out more information on the website brightcontracts.ie, and also you can request a free online demo of the software and the questionnaire. That'll be at the end of the webinar.
Okay, so how have we prepared for GDPR? Well, data protection has always been a key concern for us, and we've always aimed to act with complete integrity in this regard. Like all companies in preparation for the GDPR, we have had to complete a total review of how we gather, maintain and use data. Firstly, both Thesaurus and BrightPay are desktop applications that sit on your computer. We do not have access to your data files except for where they have been submitted for support reasons. We have no control over the authority, the quality or the safety of the data input. You and you alone are responsible for the accuracy and completeness of your records. While we have security measures in place to protect your data, it remains your responsibility to keep your sign-in details confidential and to close down the software on your PC when it is not being used. To protect your information, you will need to ensure there is no unauthorized access to your computer and that your software is password protected. Some of the key changes that we've made that will affect our customers include: from time to time, when assisting with an employee query, we may request a backup of an employer file to fully resolve the customer query. While we did have security protocols in place for this, we felt we could make it even more secure. We've created an in-program support feature that allows users to automatically send a backup of their payroll to us through a secure channel. This enhanced feature means you don't have to upload the backup to your email where you may forget to delete it. On our side, the backup never gets saved on the support assistant's PC or email account. The customer backups received are all saved centrally on a secure server, which are automatically deleted after 1 week. So, privacy policy. We have updated our privacy policy to accommodate our new data protection responsibilities. The new privacy policy explains how we use your data, who we share it with, and how long we keep it for. We have worked hard so that this updated policy is detailed yet simple and easy to understand. Over the last year, we have completed internal IT audits on all our company's PCs, securely deleting any unnecessary files and data. Going forward, we will conduct regular audits to keep track of our GDPR compliance and ensure we are not retaining any unnecessary data. We have looked at how information is sent to and retrieved from our secure servers, be it for the purpose of maintaining our websites or our CRM system. We have now changed all our servers over to more secure Microsoft Azure servers. We've also introduced IP whitelisting, meaning that knowing the login credentials is not enough. The request must come from a trusted location. We have introduced additional consent fields on different areas of our software and website. These consent forms are explicitly asking for consent to sign up to our newsletter, which contain information about webinars, special offers, legislation changes, other group products and payroll-related news. Users can also unsubscribe from our emails at any time. With the exception of essential software updates, customers will not be contacted unless they have specifically opted into our mailing list. Of course, we think that our newsletters and webinars are quite informative, so we would definitely recommend that you sign up. If you do wish to subscribe to our mailing list, you can do this on the survey after today's webinar, or in our follow-up email, or it is also on the PridePay and Thesaurus websites. Internally, we have run a number of training sessions with our staff to ensure everyone understands the implications of the GDPR legislation. Going forward, we will continue to hold in-house training and update sessions to ensure our staff are fully aware of the new legislation and how it impacts their role. If you are using our sister product, Pride Contracts, we have updated the data protection and privacy policies within the software, which Jenny showed you just before now. Finally, our cloud add-on products, and as you saw earlier in the demo with BrightPay Connect, this offers a self-service portal where employees can log in remotely to view and manage personal data as recommended by the GDPR. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. If you do have any questions about the webinar or the software, feel free to type them into the questions bar and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. While we are waiting on a few questions to come through, just to let you know about our upcoming webinars, we have 3 scheduled for September. First of all, we'll have revenue here for 2 PAYE modernisation webinars on the 4th and 6th of September. And then on the 20th of September, we will have our next GDPR webinar where we will have a guest speaker from the Data Protection Commissioner's Office. Okay, so now to have a look at the questions.
Okay, so if you just give us a few minutes, there's a lot of questions coming through there. I think we done over 300 people on the webinar there today, and I can see that some of the questions are quite long.
I might just say in here as well, because we do tend to get a few kind of pointers back. The webinar itself is obviously finished now, but the Q&A session will be included in the recording that you receive later on. So if you're stuck for time or anything, you're certainly not obliged to have to stay on it. But the Q&A sessions are very, very informative, so feel free to stay on if you wish to.
Exactly. I suppose there was a lot of information there to take in today about GDPR and your payroll processing. I suppose as much as possible, we recommend that you take steps to protect the data and also demonstrate, keep a record of how you're protecting the information that you manage. If you're ever audited, that you're able to kind of show that you've completed X, Y, and Z. And as Rachel said earlier on, if you are interested, we are running more free webinars on the world of PAYE modernisation, which is coming in January 2019, and then another GDPR webinar, which will focus on what's happened, I suppose, since GDPR has been introduced. So any GDPR changes, really, because I think that the GDPR legislation will certainly evolve, because there's a lot of grey areas around your GDPR compliance. Okay, so a few questions in here, and I'm going to, I suppose, try and read them out. Okay, so our in-house payroll software has been updated to comply with the GDPR. It is now requesting that we set a password for each individual payroll client. So in this case here now we're talking to an accountant. However, payroll is only processed via cloud computing and a login is needed, which are also password protected due to this fact. Would we still need to set up individual passwords for each payroll client?
This is quite an interesting one because we had somebody yesterday who said they had a GDPR consultant come in and recommend that they actually had a 2-point authentication in place. Now, as Karen mentioned earlier on, there is no stipulation as to, or there's no, kind of requirement to have a password protection, anywhere. But if you have the facility there, certainly there'd be no harm in doing it. I mean, if it's something that the payroll software is providing or, giving you access to, well, then it's better to be safe than sorry. If you've got the 2 options, well, then I'd probably go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that the question is why not, just set up the password for your client, and that would be seen as taking a step to protecting the payroll information that you manage. So that would be one example of proof where you're demonstrating that you're protecting the information. Okay, so the next one is a bit of a long question, so I'll do my best now to read it out properly. So when an employee seeks all personal information on them, is their employer required to provide a copy of all emails at any time from the employment start date to the date of request? When is an email judged to contain personal information, or is every email containing the employee's name regarded as personal data and to be provided in response to the employee request? Must personal information recorded pre-May 18 be provided, or is it just post-May 18? I think they're talking about the deadline there for GDPR. So what is the position regarding emails or electronic files that were deleted at any time in 2018 or prior years? I ask later, as I think deleted soft files can be resurrected by a specialist IT search. So I suppose, like with for that question there, would the employee need to seek, I suppose, the personal information that you hold on them? So that would be, their name, their email address, and information like that, or there's kind of 2 questions there.
There's 2 questions in that, yeah. I think, first of all, I'll answer the second part of that. Must personal information recorded pre-May 18 be provided? Yes, it should be. If somebody comes to you seeking access request, you need to provide them with all information that you hold on them. Now, as far as the emails go, that will kind of depend. If you have an email address, let's say like we have here, I've got Jenny at brightcontracts.ie, Karen at thesaurussoftware.ie, that specifically identifies us as individuals because we're working for this company. However, if you have your employee whose email address is jb@jbsales.ie, there's no real indicator there as to who that person is. But what I would say as well is that when somebody makes a data access request, what you can do as the processor, the controller of that data, is actually go back to them and ask them, are they looking for specific information?
Yeah.
And that way then you can actually concentrate, right, well, he wants information on what payroll data we hold on him. You can concentrate on just that and give that to him. Whereas, if, there's nothing in the GDPR to say you can't do that. And it'd be prudent as an employer to ask that question, because otherwise then, yes, you would have to go back through all of the data that you would have, whether it be, a CV application, you might have disciplinary notes on their file, things like that. You would have to provide that back to them within the month or within 40 days of giving that back to them. But I would ask the question first and foremost what it is exactly that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it is a case then that somebody says they want all emails that there's ever been any correspondence, I suppose that's like why would they want that information? Or it goes back to what I think you said it earlier on about it being like a realistic kind of request.
Yeah, I mean, it would be somewhat unfounded for them to expect you to give you every single email correspondence that you've had with them. I imagine if they've been with you for 5-6 years, that can run into the thousands.
Yeah.
So that could mean then, you learning from that and putting a policy in place whereby you set to delete or archive your emails every 12 months. And at least if you had that, then you wouldn't have that issue of having to go back. But yeah, that could be seen to be, excessive, and maybe just say, listen, the administration, or we'd need increased time to do that. We can certainly give you the last 12 months worth or the last 18 months worth of them. So, work with them.
Yeah.
And again, I think if you ask that initial question, it'll probably cut down a huge amount of what you'll have to give them.
And I suppose I haven't so far come across anybody that's asking for absolutely every single,
Everything.
If it's the payroll information, like Jenny said, it's your, maybe your PPS number, your address, your personal email address, your date of birth, which, would all be personal information that you hold on them, as opposed to, everything that's ever happened, from the beginning of time. Okay, so so the next question. Our accountants have not issued a data processor agreement to us, but we do have an existing contract in place. Should we suggest and forward such a contract and ask them to complete it like an addendum? So I suppose firstly, the onus is on the data controller to produce a contract.
Yeah.
But I suppose we deal with a lot of accountants and payroll bureaus, so we're certainly recommending that they take steps to work with their clients to make sure that they have that contract or letter of engagement or addendum in place that covers GDPR. So I suppose either or in that case, you can create your contract to, and all of that a lot more detailed information is on our website that covers it, to say, X, Y, and Z is happening under GDPR, and to make sure that they're compliant, or, your accountant can come to you. So just to make sure that you're covered as the business owner and the data controller to whatever information that your accountant processes on your behalf, being it like payroll or tax returns, or, accountants certainly look after other things other than payroll.
Yeah, exactly. But that data protection agreement that we have on the support section online would be classed as an addendum to an existing contract. But so certainly, Alvin, have a look at that on the website. And you'll be able to garner from that if you want to use that, or take from it information that you can create your own with as well.
Okay. So can we receive a cert to show we attended this webinar?
Well, the webinar isn't CPD certified, but we can issue attendance certificates for some people. So if you do want to receive one, just make sure you fill in the survey after today's webinar and just leave a note there, and we can get back to you with the certificate.
Yeah. I suppose it's not officially a CPD accredited, but it is content that is advising you on GDPR compliance and your payroll data. And that's for, I suppose, mainly accountants there in that case. Okay, so the next question. We print payslips and put in their personal tray in the front office. Should we personally hand or get signatures for proof of receiving? We are hoping to change to email. So I suppose this goes back to what steps are you protecting to protect that information that would be in somebody's personal tray. So, if it's in someone's personal tray, could anybody else, I'm kind of coming up with different scenarios, but could anybody else go up to that tray and literally take that payslip? And, in that instance, you haven't taken steps to protect the payslips. I know years ago when I worked in retail, they were all just put on the canteen table, and everybody's, name on them, and, maybe their address or something like that. So in that case, you're opening yourself up, if you were audited and it was like, well, this is what we've done, and you haven't in that case protected the information. So I suppose the easiest thing, if I was processing payroll, I would try and set up a personal employee email to email it to the individual employee. And as you said there, you're hoping to change to email, and it also password protected. So, does everybody have an individual office? Is that office locked? Obviously it's not a case if you're just going around and putting payslips in everybody's personal tray. So What would you say, Jenny?
Yeah, no, I mean, if she's considering going with the email, I'd be inclined to go with that, or certainly just hand it to them.
Yeah.
Even getting the signatures as proof of them receiving, it's not ensuring the security of it. I think the fact that they're just being kind of left open, well, obviously not the envelopes, but they're left in an open area where anybody can see them or take them. You could just open yourself up, as Karen said there. Wall of issues,
or else, they could be on the HR manager, the HR manager could have them in a cabinet, and, employees would have to go and get them off the HR manager, and, they're printed off in a locked cabinet. So, you have taken steps to protect the information. Okay. So next question, is separate consent required for handling employee bank information and processing bank payments on behalf of their employees? So,
on behalf of employers. So I'm assuming that's a payroll bureau or an accountant asking that.
Yeah.
Your data protection agreement, your contract would have that stipulated, whether or not you're actually going to be processing information. The employer then would have to have in their employee privacy policy that there is a third party who would be processing the payroll and using their bank details. Generally wouldn't be an issue if the employees have been paid via the bank up to now. I can't see anybody's going to, have an issue with that, but the employee would have the option or the right to erasure if they didn't want those bank details being processed by the third party. So that would come down to those new and enhanced rights. They could ask for the banking information to be deleted and request.
But then, if I can just, like yesterday, as well, we did a webinar on GDPR, so we're kind of constantly getting new questions and trying to understand GDPR ourselves. But I suppose, like, if it's the legitimate, that goes back to your legitimate reason, like you have your legitimate reason, that you need to pay employees and you need to hold that information. So if you have that information in your privacy policy, that you're giving that information to an accountant, you wouldn't need to, would you need to?
But the employee would still have the option of actually asking you to get rid of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So they.
But then how would you pay it then? How would you pay them then?
You could pay them a check. Unfortunately, we do still have checks.
Yeah.
It could be that they request specifically that the third party doesn't have their bank details. They mightn't be comfortable. It's something that I have come across just once before. You don't come across it too often, but where the employee themselves was not comfortable with the accountant in question processing their bank details.
Yeah.
So in that case, the employee would be able to request that, I don't want the accountant doing that.
Yeah.
You just give me a check or else you pay me.
Right, okay.
Themselves. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah. The accountant can still hold the other personal information that processes.
Yeah,
okay.
And no, they wouldn't need consent to handle that because it is part of your contract.
Yeah.
From what I'm gathering there, you've been an accountant or payroll bureau. It would already be in your contract there that you're going to be doing that. So no.
Okay. Interesting. Let's learn something every day. So, okay, if we receive a CV and do not interview, should we shred details immediately? I might go to you, because I'm actually doing this at the moment. I'm hiring somebody at the moment, and I know I've put everybody into a special folder that only myself has access to and the HR manager has access to. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the statutory retention periods would be.
There's none for job applicants. So you would need to put in place a policy to state if you were going to keep them or if you were going to shred them, straight away. Yeah. And if that job applicant were to ask, you would obviously have to be able to
delete it, and shred it.
Requested it. But job applicants, you could probably keep, because you might have another position in a couple of months.
Exactly.
If you did keep it, let's say for 6 months, you would just need to inform the job applicant that, listen, we'll keep your information on file for 6 months and then we'll remove it.
Yeah. And that goes back to your kind of legitimate reason or your steps, like if you hired somebody and maybe they left after a month, I would go back to all of those CVs and kind of go, okay, who is, down to the final list or whatever. So I think as long as you're able to logically kind of talk about it, and say why. Okay. So are public bodies employed by the government department liable to penalties? This
No.
was a bill brought to exempt public bodies, was this passed? Or there was a bill brought to exempt public bodies, was this passed?
Yeah, it's not privy to anybody in the government or any public, it's or any public bodies. It is all just private companies. So yeah, you won't see anybody in the Dáil getting done for a breach of data protection, or anybody in the HSE or the guards or anything like that. No, it is just for the private sector.
Yeah. Okay, if you decide to send payslips to the employees only, how does an employer know what to pay its employees? So I suppose if they're doing the payroll in-house and they're using payroll software, they can see how much the employee is due to be paid, and I suppose the payslip is just a kind of a record of what you've done.
Your payslip is your statement, so they're legally obliged to receive a statement of their weekly or monthly earnings. I would pick that question up as maybe Conor being an accountant or a payroll bureau again.
Yeah.
And this is a question that came up yesterday. It is a recommendation. It is a requirement that you have a contract in place between a third-party provider and the controller of the data, i.e. your accountant, let's say, and the company. Generally, it would be kind of recommended that the third-party provider, i.e. the accountant or the payroll bureau, would go directly to the employer, i.e. send the payslips to the employer, and they would sign them off, or agree to them, and then they would send them out. There's nothing to say you can't send them directly to the employees, but from an admin point of view, it would be better to actually keep them entirely separate, because the contract is between the payroll processor and the employer, as opposed to the payroll processor and the employee. So I would assume then, even in that regard, some kind of payroll summary would have to be sent to the employer first for them to sign off before payslips were sent.
Yeah, you would do a report as well. It would be another way of doing it, and stipulates what the wages are, etc. Will a recording be available? I missed the start of it. Yes, Jenny, we're going to send on a copy of the recording along with a copy of the PowerPoint to everybody who attended and anybody who missed it. Okay, so emergency contact details. Is it safe to pass these details to each appropriate manager, or should it only be held at a HR level?
Your employee privacy policy, you can stipulate, or you would have to stipulate to the individual who has access to the data that you hold on them. So there's nothing to say you can't have the information with different managers and different departments or whatever it might be, but you would just have to inform the employee via the employee privacy policy of who has access to their data. So there's nothing to stop you. You can do it, yeah.
Okay. So we are using a standard package, so I think that means like an employer, either a Thesaurus or BrightPay package. We have 3 employees. Do we need to apply by GDPR? Yes, you do need to comply with GDPR. And I suppose, like as Rachel went through earlier on, like we've certainly taken steps to help you with your GDPR compliance. So we would recommend that you follow those steps. I suppose it's not automatic that you're GDPR compliant if you use BrightPay or Thesaurus, but if you take steps to password protect your computer, make sure the application itself, the payroll software application itself is password protected, etc., etc. So it is down to you, the business owner or the employer, to make sure that you're compliant with GDPR. I'm a sole trader. I employ one person for 2 days a week for 8 months of the year. Should I have a contract of employment with him?
Yes, absolutely. You should, regardless of how long somebody is working with you, unless they're the likes of, a school student from transition year coming in for work experience for 1 or 2 weeks. You do absolutely have to have a contract of employment in place. You would be breaching the Terms of Employment Act by not having them. And if that employee were to bring you to a WRC adjudicator, you could face quite substantial fines for not having it there. So yeah, absolutely. We would point you in that direction.
Yeah, that's it for all employers. And that's, Bright Contracts is a very handy software tool, because it creates the contracts of employment for every employee, and then also produces your handbook, and you can edit it, and it has a lot of information there. So if you're interested in having a look at that, to sign up for the survey and just request one of the demos, because it is a very, very handy tool rather than spending hours trying to write up a contract, So, so as a payroll processor, is it required to password protect certain reports sent by email to the employer as requested, i.e. gross to net reports required in order to pay the employees? So first of all, it's not a black and white rule that, under your payroll processing, you have to password protect your payroll reports that you send to clients. But again, it just goes back to, if you're ever audited, what steps have you taken? And that would be an example of one step that you've taken. You've password protected, or, that would be personal information that you manage on behalf of your clients. And you want to be seen to protect that information, and I suppose not open yourself up to, to any breach of GDPR. So, and I suppose yesterday we were saying that nobody can be 100% GDPR compliant. You could be compliant now as of today, and in an hour's time something could happen. Exactly. Somebody could, maybe write down somebody called from me or something, and we took down their name and their phone number, and it was left on my desk. Technically under GDPR, that's, I'm in breach. So, but you just need to really try to take steps to become GDPR compliant as much as possible, and, okay. So should you give references for past employees? Is this now a breach?
It's not a breach, no. I mean, your personal data can only be processed, if it's fair and transparent, and the 6 kind of principles of it. It's not a legal obligation either to provide references for past employees, but it's kind of standard. Most employers would, and unless you kind of have a specific reason for not giving it, there's no reason why you can't still continue. You're not actually physically holding personal data. You're kind of relaying information as opposed to processing personal data. So no, references would be perfectly fine. Absolutely.
Is it required to update passwords for payroll login at any stage? So I suppose like anything with your passwords, I'm certainly guilty of not updating my passwords, but I'm probably
using the same
one for loads of different things. And so look, it's common sense, and it's recommended as much as possible to password protect things and to update your passwords. I don't know, maybe every 6 months or every year. But it's recommended to update your passwords and change them around. I suppose particularly, if you're processing the payroll and maybe you have a change of a HR manager or somebody that processes it, so maybe an in-house accountant. I know that would be something that we would do in relation to like our CRM systems and sales systems in here. When people leave, that we just change the password, and that's just to add the security and to protect the information that we manage. So yes, it's definitely recommended, but we can't make you do anything, or GDPR can't make you do anything. So the next question: where an employee requests information held on them, are you required to give them copies of references sought and received? Thanks.
If you have that information on file, it's personal data, so yes, you would have to give it to them.
Yeah. In the case, though, of a verbal reference,
no.
You wouldn't have to write all that down and kind of said, I said this and this about you. But I suppose, if somebody's applying for a job and they included a reference that was about them, absolutely, they can ask for it back or to have it deleted. Okay. Next question: do we need to advise payroll employees? Sorry, just give me 1 second while I read this. Do we need to advise employees that their payroll data will be submitted to our accountants for year-end accounts? So yes, and that goes back to your privacy policy, which Jenny went through earlier on. Yes, if you're sharing personal information of your employees with a third party, you need to inform your employees that you're sharing that information and for what purpose. Okay, next question. We have to submit all employees' details to the CWPS. Pension has to be provided to employees under, there's a lot of abbreviations here, under SEO last October, which is done by email, i.e. name, date of birth, BPS and address. This is a legitimate reason, but are we covered under GDPR guidelines? I'm not sure what's...
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You
the
know.
CWPS is the Construction Workers Pension Scheme.
Okay.
So it's a new well, it's not a new, but there was a new sectoral employment order released last October in relation to updates to it. No, absolutely, that's an obligation. You're legally obliged to fill in those forms and send them back. So that is a legitimate reason, and you would certainly be covered. You would be compliant under GDPR to send it, Tom. Yeah.
Okay. If I am asked for the phone number of an employee, can I give it?
Depends who's asking.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I suppose, say, in-house here, we would all have direct lines, you know, and if somebody maybe called and, you know, there might be a new business partner or something, I might give them their direct line. I suppose it's not something that we advertise, because sometimes we get a lot of sales, like a million sales calls trying to sell us something.
Yeah.
But I suppose a personal phone number of an employee, I wouldn't give that out really.
No, not a personal phone number, certainly not. I mean, you know, if it's a client looking for them, again, you know, you might have to have a policy put in place there. Like if you're an accountancy firm, let's say, you don't necessarily want your customers ringing you directly on your mobile at 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening.
Exactly,
so you might put in place a policy there that, you know, only notes will be taken and messages will be passed. And, you know, it's up to the individuals obviously to decide that. But yeah, generally we would have a policy in here. Nobody's personal number is given out.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, next question. So I do the wages but send out our accounts end of year. So should we have a contract as we have all info on employees? So yes, you know, you're sending the personal information to a third party. So yes, you need to, again, your letter of engagement or your addendum, you know, whatever you choose, lots of information on our website, and you need to make sure that that third party is also managing that personal information that you send them under GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if you have an issue with your computer and had to access remote support to your customer support service provider, do you have any exposure under GDPR? So if you have a support issue and you need to send information to customer support, so I suppose it goes back to making sure that your software providers and your customer support, you know, whoever
are displaying compliance.
Yeah, that they're working towards GDPR compliance. As Rachel said earlier on, you know, we now have this inbuilt program. If anybody does need to send us their payroll information, they can securely do that, and then it's automatically deleted. I think it's after a week. Is it, Jenny? After maybe 5 days to a week.
Yeah.
So it's automatically deleted. So it's not, you know, it's not emailed from the customer, and then it's not sitting on our customer support's email address, and they may forget to delete it. So you're opening yourself up there. So you need to ask the question, if you ever need to send a file, what?
Absolutely, yeah. But that service provider should also have their own data protection privacy policy updated to inform you as to what measures they have in relation to disposing of your data. As we said, we've created and implemented measures to ensure our security, and our privacy policy has been updated to indicate that to you as well. So I'd be looking at their privacy policies to see what they have done.
Yeah, because like we wouldn't want to hold on to that information as well, you know, because it would, you know, it'd open us up. You know, if anything ever happened to that information and it wasn't securely managed. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is the last question. So just if you did have any more questions there, I suppose we have another couple of minutes that we're here for. So if revenue is asking for the mobile number of a client, a company or a sole trader, can I give it?
Again, this will come down to the client themselves. again, I'd be more inclined to give them the office number or the company number as opposed to a personal mobile number for somebody. You know, they mightn't appreciate you handing that out without first verifying with them first that it's okay. So you would need to check with them.
Yeah.
But again, I'd be more inclined to always go with a landline number.
Yeah, that would,
possible.
yeah, absolutely. A business number, you know, you're putting yourself at risk there, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't, but I think, you know, that would be down to the customer themselves.
Yeah.
And you requesting permission from them.
Yeah. Okay, look, that's everything. There is a lot of information on our website about GDPR, frequently asked questions about your contract, etc. And as I said, we are running another one. I suppose it's one that's coming up, and it's more of an overall GDPR one in September. So it'll be looking at any changes, I suppose, anything that's happened in recent months about GDPR. So it is very good. So I'd recommend that you opt in to our newsletter. So thanks so much, Jenny. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to everybody that attended and enjoyed the sunshine. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.